Will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
You're recognized, Ms. Scanlon.
Madam Chair, my amendment, I would move the committee making order amendment number 7 to H-Con Res 14 offered by Representative McGarvey, which strikes the instructions to the House Committee on Education and Workforce in order to protect the National School Lunch Program, the National School Breakfast Program, and community eligibility provision for school meals from any cuts or reduction. This amendment would strike the instructions to prevent damaging cuts to schools, school meal programs, and education programs for kids trying to make it through the day with something in their stomach. It's unconscionable that this Republican budget would take food assistance from the mouths of kids. School meals programs are one of the most important anti-hunger programs that we have in this country to keep kids healthy and to help them learn. Cutting $330 billion in federal assistance to schools will have a devastating effect on our nation's children. It'll leave kids hungry. So therefore, I would urge a yes vote on my amendment.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
thank you for recognizing me. That's just not true. There's not a single specific cut in this budget resolution to a program to state that in the resolution we are cutting school lunches is just not factual. So I'm at a loss for words. I yield back.
Madam Chair,
Yes, thank you.
Mr. McGovern.
I'm going to yield to Ms. Scanlon in a second, but I'm at a loss for words too. When your budget contains numbers that, extraordinarily high numbers that demand major cuts in programs, for example, in USDA, $230 billion, I mean, we know where those cuts are going to be. It's going to be in nutrition programs. To suggest that, oh, we don't, you know, we're not super specific, so therefore, you know, we get a pass to vote for this with no consequences. I'm sorry, we're not going to let that go by. This budget, if it were enacted and if it were the basis for reconciliation, would devastate the middle class and would stick it to poor people in a way that we have never seen. And by the way, it doesn't save any money. It doesn't balance the budget. It's going to provide tax cuts for wealthy people, and we're going to see the deficit continue to grow. We just don't share the same values or the same belief when it comes to what's reflected in this budget. And I yield back to Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you. I mean, yes, it's not specifically in the budget, but the numbers are in the budget, and where those cuts are supposed to come from was outlined in the wish list that was leaked from the Republican conference earlier this year. So it's, you know, disingenuous to say that there won't be these kind of cuts when the only way you can reach the numbers that occur in this resolution would be if you make the cuts that we're talking about. And it's been acknowledged by our Republican colleagues. So that's all. I'll go back.
Mr. Norman.
You know, we all know what this is about. This is just for supposedly political points. Let me just point out that, you know, in all due respect, it's so hypocritical of y'all. During the last 4 years, when you had people coming across this border, you had children who were being raped, you had fentanyl flowing in from China. Where was your voice then? Where was the words of you feel so sorry for the people who were killed by the illegals? You didn't say a thing. And now you're lecturing us, and just, I'll take as much time as it needs. We can sit here all night. I hope you put up 100 amendments like this. But it's really hypocritical for y'all when you stayed quiet with an inept president who couldn't even spell his last name, letting this country go to shambles and do the damage that he has done that's being corrected now. Yeah. And, you know, keep doing it. The American people get where y'all are coming from. And, you know, keep what you're doing, because it's just, it's sad, really, because not one word was mentioned by a Democrat. I yield back.
Madam Chair, I need to correct the record, because in this committee, many of us spoke out against the terrible violence against innocent civilians and we go back and we'll provide you the record, okay. Mr. Norman. I know you have selective memory when it comes to things like that.
Will you yield?
Yeah, I'm happy to yield. Well, I don't have the time. I'm just going at the good graces of the chair here, but I'm happy to yield.
Okay, where was the bill that you put up to build a border wall, to stop the immigration?
well-
Where were, your words, you say the words, but there were no actions behind it.
Well, where's the border wall that you promised to build?
No, where was your,
Yeah, I don't
where was,
believe a
you
border
didn't
wall.
do
I
it?
don't believe a border wall is the way you solve the
Okay,
problem.
then what solved
So,
it?
yeah.
You tell me, you let them in.
Well, but let's go back down to what this amendment is about. I know you don't want to talk about it, but let's talk about what this amendment is about. And that's what we're debating here right now. So you could vote no on it. You voted for billionaires over and over and over again today, over middle-class families and people struggling to get a middle class. If that's where your values are, fine. But let's talk about the amendment that Ms. Scanlon has.
Mr.
before
Governor,
us.
it's just words, you know that. It's just words.
Madam Chair,
I yield back.
Mr. Roy.
I would just, bringing it back to the point at hand, although I agree with the gentleman from South Carolina's overall point, I would just note that in terms of what we're putting forward in this budget, CBO baseline outlays are $85.7 trillion over 10 years. $85.7 trillion. The House instruction is for $84.07 trillion. That's what we're talking about. What we're saying is that for $84 trillion over 10 years, we can't do the business of government. It's absolutely laughable. And in fact, the only criticism that I think you could levy against it is that it's absurd that we're still talking about $84 trillion and that we're not reducing that number further. $84 trillion is what this budget would put forward. I can frankly barely tolerate it
And what's the debt?
because it's so high, $84 trillion.
And what's the debt you're going to accumulate?
The debt that we would accumulate, we believe it would hold the line at the current $2 trillion level debt. The current $2 trillion debt with the goal of having growth to be able to drive that down through regulatory policy and economic policy and unleashing American energy by repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, which gives billions of dollars of tax credits to billion-dollar corporations to the tune of $1.2 trillion, crushing American energy and forcing Americans to be living with inflation, destroying the average hardworking American's family budget. It is the inflationary pressures that is devastating hardworking American families. And you guys are playing the same old games of politics when it's American families getting crushed by Democrat inflationary pressures. And we're trying to put forward a responsible budget. And $84 trillion, America, is not enough for our Democratic colleagues.
We just asked-
Not $84 trillion.
We're asking you not to cut food for poor people.
You don't have to.
Yeah, you are. You are.
Come up with $84 trillion.
No.
I yield back.
No.
Madam Chair?
I want to make one quick comment. Ms. Scanlon told the truth a few minutes ago, and I didn't get a chance to say it. She says, yes, the numbers are not there to cut these programs, but we all know what's going to happen. So for the first time tonight, you all admitted that you're making up all of these things that you're saying.
Did not.
And I'm gonna get it out of the record tomorrow and use it in the debate, in the rule, because that's what you said. You said it's not there. So for the first time tonight, you told the truth, and we've been saying that all evening. None of these things that you've made up are in this budget, none of them. And it's just, you're making things up as you go along. And the American people can read the budget and see that the cuts to SNAP are not there, the cuts to education are not there in the specific ways you talked about it. So they're not there. I'd like to move on
Is there
tonight.
Is there a $230 billion cut in the agriculture
I-
section of the budget?
I'd like to move on because I think now we have on record that,
There's a $230 billion
What you
cut
want.
in the ag section of this bill.
okay. Are there any further we're not on an amendment. Are we on an amendment? We
We're on
are.
Ms. Scanlon's
Okay.
amendment.
Your amendment. Okay.
Dealing with school
Any
lunches.
further discussion?
We wanted to protect schools.
Ms.
I believe
Ledger
we're on Ms.
Hernandez.
Scanlon's amendment, and so I'd like to have discussion on it, and I'm going to yield to Ms. Scanlon at the beginning.
Yeah, as I said at the outset, I mean, Mr. Roy wants to talk about the trillions in debt. I want to talk about the kids in my district who are hungry, and that the budget proposed by the Republicans is going to threaten their ability to get school lunches. Because the only way you can make your budget numbers work in this resolution is if you make those cuts. And your own members have admitted that. So That's why we are seeking to protect it. If it's not true, vote for the amendment. I yield back to Ms. Ledger.
And Madam Chair, I believe when Representative Scanlon was saying is that you have suggested that there be cuts to the Education Committee and that the numbers are not there with regards to cutting. You cannot suggest a cut to the Education Committee of that magnitude without cutting school lunches. So let's be clear about what she was talking about. And indeed, Chairman Arrington circulated a menu of cuts in January, which included $12 billion of cuts to school meals. So when you tell Education and Workforce, cut $330 billion, we object. We say we do not want you to cut $330 billion of our children's education, and we are saying through this amendment, let's protect school lunches. So that's what this amendment does, is it would protect school lunches from the $330 billion of cuts that Republicans have suggested. It's a simple amendment. That's what it does. And I urge my colleagues to stand for education, to stand for healthy children, to stand for children who are not hungry when they go to school, and to support this amendment. And with that, anything else? No. I yield back.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no? No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed
I
to.
would ask for a roll call vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack? No. Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments?